I might fight about this one.
Really? Ooh.
Might as well start.
Bring it on.
With the gloves on. Yeah.
Come on. So fight. Sock it to me.
I just want to know, did that just come out of your brain just instantly and you have no idea where it came from?
Actually, I wanted to challenge you a bit because I know that you don't want to talk about the slides. It's been talked about so much. You've got a no slides policy on your show. And so I knew that you would cringe a bit and be like, oh, man, don't attach me to that debacle.
No, that's all right. You might as well just pull me into the whole mess. Okay.
Yeah. Martin Willis. He was in Mexico. I'll start this rumor that he was the guy who started the whole thing, and he was the one who found them and brought them to the researchers and says, hey, this is an alien.
Yeah, I'm the guy that ran the estate sale, but I didn't want to come out with it.
Oh, we could start a rumor.
You know? Yeah.
I know, because you're in antiques and you know all about this estate sales that you found, that you created the images. You took the pictures at a museum, made them look like they were old, found sleeves at estate sales, replaced the new sleeves with old ones from your estate sales.
All right.
I'm starting to believe myself now that maybe you did have something to do with this.
Yeah, I was behind the whole thing.
See how the subconscious worked? My subconscious knew that you were the hoaxer.
Yep. That's right, buddy.
All right. Well, I'm glad that we got that solved. Now we really can let go of the Roswell slides.
Yeah. I know. This is good closure.
Yeah. So our guest is tonight. This is a fun guest. His name, I'm not sure if you've ever interviewed him on your podcast UFO, but his name is Bill Wickersham. Are you familiar with him?
No, I'm not familiar. No.
Yeah, he's a neat guy. He's been a UFO researcher for many, many years, and this is a lot of fun. And we had a mutual friend who is Dr. Leo Sprinkle. You've interviewed him.
Oh, yes.
Dr. Sprinkle has been, investigating this stuff for decades. And it was Dr. Sprinkle who told, was friends with Bill Wickersham, who told him about all of this stuff. And he was skeptical at first, but over the years, he came to realize that, or came to have the feeling that there is something to the phenomena, and now he writes about it. He's actually an activist. He's an adjunct professor with the University of Missouri, and so that's why it's really fun. He writes some stories once in a while. They write his opinion pieces and in some of the local papers, and they allow him to do columns periodically on UFOs. And so we talked to him about UFOs and some of his research and what it's like, being a college professor, and how your colleagues and so forth feel about UFOs. And also we talked to him about what's interesting about him and what's great about him and people of his ilk. Of course, that you have to be a pretty strong character in order to talk about UFOs as a college professor, but he also goes to, kind of mundane, regular organizations that he's involved with to talk about UFOs. These are people that are certainly not attached to it. And so he talks about his experiences doing that sort of thing. Although we also talk about nukes and UFOs because he's been a nuclear weapons activist for many, many years.
You mean he wants to activate them?
No, that would be an activator.
Oh, okay, I got confused.
Sorry. That's probably why he likes the UFOs, because, we have these stories of them deactivating the nukes.
All except at one time. Of the situation where they were on a go status?
Oh, I do, but they didn't launch them, luckily.
They didn't launch them. They could have.
Yeah,
they probably should have, but
yeah.
But yeah.
That was probably the warning. Speaking, David Letterman retired recently, so a lot of news on David Letterman. And he did this thing, where he goes through the drive-thrus, or he pretends like he's working the drive-thru at a fast food restaurant.
Yeah.
There was one that was really funny that's always stuck with me, and I think it was Canada or Switzerland. Someone came through, he asked where they were from. And he says, you do realize we could nuke your country if we wanted to, just wipe you completely off the planet. That was pretty funny.
Must have went over nicely.
Yeah. Luckily, we haven't done that yet, but that could have been what they're telling us. We could nuke your planet and destroy you so you do not exist, so be careful. I
think, really, to take that topic seriously, I agree with you that, you can only try to figure out what is going on through that whole situation, but it really does point to the fact, like Robert Hastings believes that it's a warning, get your act together.
Mm-hmm. And it does seem, given Robert Hastings' excellent work, big fan of his work, and some of the other witnesses such as Robert Salas, there does seem to be a connection, don't you think?
I think so. I mean, it makes perfect sense. The rash of UFO sightings came after 1947. Not to say that they weren't seen before, but it just it seemed like there were a lot more sightings, and then eventually these things started happening, and it's still going on.
Right. I agree. All right. Well, so we'll be talking to Professor Wickersham in just a little while. However, first, Martin and I are going to talk about some UFO news that went down this past week. And as usual, Martin, we'll let you start it off. What's the UFO story you would like to talk about?
Well, today I'd like to talk about a hotel that is, sort of out of this world. Mm-hmm. Now, the owner of Alien Fresh Jerky, with product names such as Abducted Cow Beef Jerky, Teriyaki, I forgot to add that. Mm-hmm. Well, he's launched a Kickstarter campaign, and to persuade all of you out there listening and more to fund his $30 million hotel planned for Eastern California and Baker. Now, in Baker, there's only, I guess, in the census back in 2010, there were 735 restaurants. But if you've ever made the trek between L.A. and Las Vegas, you'll see the big, huge thermometer. That's where it is. And probably a good portion of those 735 residents work at the jerky factory. Now, he's saying there's something like, I forget exactly how many people run through that town, but he's claiming it's like 750,000 people go through there. So he wants to open up this UFO-like hotel, and with a $300 a night price tag, which is fairly reasonable considering the thing would be $30 million to build. And you can pledge for as little as $1 all the way up to $10,000. And he's looking to raise $175,000. I'm not really sure where he's planning on getting the other $29,825,000. But I guess it's a start maybe to get the ball rolling. But would you stay at a hotel like that, Alejandro?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, for the novelty of it, that would be really cool, I think. I think I would too. Mm-hmm. And it shows, if you look at the article, it's right here in Open Minds, you'll see that it's going to have quite a layout. And this guy, arrived in this country with like $100 in his pocket. So he's kind of like an entrepreneur, and he's definitely thinking out of the box for sure. Yeah.
I don't know where he's come up with all this alien things, but if you're going to do aliens, why not in the middle of the desert?
Yeah, well, I have some backstory. I wrote about this a year ago when he first came up with the idea. Now he's got this Kickstarter out, or is it Indiegogo? I can't remember which. But
I think it's Kickstarter.
Yeah, so he's got this Kickstarter to raise some money for it. But there were some stories back when this came out a year ago, and you can find this on Open Minds. You can Google jerky on Open Minds, and you won't get jerky people, but you'll get some news about beef jerky. And when he came, his green card said alien, and that's how he came up with the idea to call his jerky thing Alien Fresh Jerky. But this is interesting. He took like the weekend off of work to go sell beef jerky, and he was in the middle of nowhere. He actually didn't even realize this, but he set up this beef jerky stand near Area 51. He didn't even know about Area 51. But he sets up this jerky stand. He said he made $800 the first day. Well, like you said, that's 8 times more than he had when he came. And he decided, wow, this is what I'm going to do. So he set up a stand on the side of the highway, and he chose a great highway. People from L.A. are going back and forth to Las Vegas all the time. Lots of times gangsters from L.A. will go out there, shoot a couple of their rival gang members, go home, pick up some jerky on the way. But
Wow.
Hopefully people are probably buying jerky on the way out because they can't afford it on the way back. But yeah, he's selling jerky like crazy. I even titled my story, the old one, Beef Jerky Mogul's UFO Hotel Gets the Green Light, because he got permission from the county to do it. But yeah, he made all this money, and his shop kept growing and growing, and he's got all these aliens hanging around his shop, and he's got like this fake UFO, and that looks like it's crashed into the building. One sitting outside of his shop, and he's got this like UFO car. So all of this stuff that he's been doing, so he's been making so much money selling beef jerky on the side of the road that, yeah, now he feels, I guess, he's going to be able to raise these millions of dollars to create this elaborate hotel.
Wow.
Fun.
Only in America this could happen.
Yeah, only in America.
Yeah.
But that is a fun story. I wasn't expecting you to talk about that one, so that's a lot of fun.
I know,
I'm glad you did.
That's why I picked it. Yeah.
Great job, Martin. Good
Wanted to
job,
throw you
buddy.
off a little.
Yeah, you did well. You did well. So, another story that has kind of gotten refreshed in the news, unless you had more to say about beef jerky.
No, I'm all done with the jerky.
Okay, good. But it is called alien beef jerky. I wonder if that's going to scare off extraterrestrials because they believe that we're going to make beef jerky out of them.
Wow. That's a really good tactic.
Being America, it wouldn't surprise me. Especially in these desert towns, like if someone did find an alien, their first thought would be, I'm going to make beef jerky out of this and sell it for a lot of money.
Well, they'd weigh it, of course, first, see if it'd be worth it.
Yeah. But you could sell a stick of real alien beef jerky for a lot of money.
Probably. I think so.
Yeah, so...
I wonder if it's gray.
Yeah, gray jerky. That's a good point.
Could be. Mm.
So we'll move on from the jerky. Are you ready to move away from the jerky?
Sure, yeah.
Okay, cool. So this is another story in the news that was actually made news quite some time ago, years ago, in fact. This Russian UFO video. This often happens. You've probably seen this a lot, where someone on YouTube will go steal someone's video from years and years ago, repost it, and then the media, sometimes they don't even claim it's new. Sometimes they do. This one, actually, they did it. They put in the title 2015. And the media then picks up on it and thinks it's a new video when it's not. And that's what happened recently with this Russian UFO video that was posted. And it's these balls of light seen during the day over Russia. And it's a very interesting video. The video is actually purportedly, we don't know for sure because we're just referring to the original YouTube video, which there's very little information on. But it seems like that the video at least was posted and popularized in 2013. Which is interesting because in 2012 there was a rash of very similar sightings over St. Petersburg, and although these videos are reposted, at least according to the media and others, what these UFOs are is still in question. People don't know what they are. Some people are adamant that they are military flares. They are in a grouping. They are bright like military flares. Many people argue that military flares twinkle or they look kind of like Chinese lanterns and they have smoke that can be discernible. I heard a lot of that this weekend that, it's obvious what flares are. Completely not true. Military flares the technology is incredible. They are extremely bright. I posted videos that I've got of flares. You don't see smoke. You don't see flickering. You see these extremely bright yellowish colored lights. And that's all you see with military flares. So it's certainly a possibility. But I think they're pretty interesting videos.
I'd like to actually argue that point a little bit because
Go for it.
I watched that video all the way through. And first of all, I was sitting with my Russian girlfriend and she translated basically what they were saying. And that is, wow, look at this, it's a gift. And then he talks about giving the film to someone. And then they keep saying, he keeps saying over to the left. So he moves over to the left. He looks. He's upset that his hands are shaking and it's blurry, and he wishes he had a better camera. That's kind of what the general conversation is. But the reason I'd like to argue the point of flares is because it completely fades out near about 3/4 of the way through the video, fades out to nothing like often you hear these things do, and then it comes back, and then it comes back over to the left a little bit, just you can just barely see it. So I as far as I know, you wouldn't see flares on a clear, beautiful day. It's coming into twilight, but still you wouldn't see them completely go out and then come back on and be in the same formation. You know, it can't be new flares. It was basically the same formation. So I don't think it's flares.
You do make some good points because, yeah, I mean, typically flares are at night. Now, I have seen them start up in the same area again because what you don't see, this is at night usually. You don't see the jets because they're usually running with lights off. They'll just have their lights in a covert mode where they can only be seen by IR or by night vision. And they will fly and drop the flares in the same exact place where they just were, probably because they're lighting up something in that area or something. Who knows? I don't know what the hell they're doing. But so I could argue that maybe they could appear again in the same area. But why at twilight? And at twilight, you would see the jets, you would think, too. So those are some good arguments. Did you talk to maybe one of your other girlfriends also, like your military expert girlfriend?
She was unavailable. I can't have them both in the same place at the same time.
Right, yeah, that could be difficult.
Yeah, it never works.
You make some good points, though. Yeah, that's why I like this story, and I still posted it. The videos are still mysterious, and it isn't for sure what was caught on video.
Right. It's interesting.
Yeah, they are really interesting. So, yeah, that's a good story. And then the last story I would like to talk about, which I think is kind of fun, and is a celebrity story. Not a lot of people, sometimes people don't like talking about celebrity stories. Well, you know what? Let me take that back. A lot of people do like talking about celebrity stories, but for some reason there are a lot of people who hate it. They get so upset. Why are you talking about celebrities? What do I care about celebrities? Well, there's a lot of people that care about celebrities. People are celebrities because, a lot of people follow them and care what they have to say and what they do. So that's why. But anyway, there is this electronic dance music guy. He makes music. He's also a producer. His name is Skrillex. And, I wasn't too familiar with him. I became familiar with him through Travis Walton because Travis Walton kept talking about his friend Skrillex and how he's gone to his friend's birthday parties, how this guy's a major big deal, and that there's always movie stars and rock stars at this guy's birthday party in California. And he's a big UFO buff. He loves the Travis Walton story. He's into ancient aliens. He had at his last birthday party Giorgio Tsoukalos, who I got to reconnect with this weekend. I contacted in the Vet Desert. He was there, so I haven't posted it yet, but I'll post my picture with him. And by the way, a few weeks ago we covered this story about Giorgio where he talked about his UFO sighting, and I also put a bunch of the meme pictures in there of the alien ones and some real funny ones. Giorgio read that and he said he thought it was really funny and he loved it, which is good because that's the whole story about how Giorgio's real lighthearted. He's got a great sense of humor and he loves the memes, which is
See,
yeah.
I wondered about that.
Yeah, so did I. That's why I loved writing this story, and I wasn't surprised. I loved his answer and reaction that he loves these memes and they're fun. And and I think he's got just, I'm not into all of the ancient aliens. I think there's a lot of mysteries. I'm not so sure they're all related to aliens, but he is a very pleasant person. He's so entertaining. He's so fun to listen to, and he's got just a great attitude. He's so positive and fun. So, but he read this story, but he was at Skrillex's last birthday party too. Well, why am I talking about Skrillex? Because just in the last few days, Google released that they have worked with Skrillex to release these phone covers for the Androids. Google owns Android, if you're not aware. And with these covers comes an application and wallpaper. And the wallpaper shows live feeds from a satellite of Earth. Really cool idea. So they have these cameras, they're launching with balloons, and so you get a live imagery of the Earth from these satellites on your phone as your wallpaper. So really cool.
Wow.
But why that's interesting to us is because Skrillex said he had a dream about aliens, which I guess he may think is an actual alien contact. But this application was alien inspired. So he got this idea from this dream with aliens and stuff like that. And Google didn't write about it, but others have. So yeah, this whole thing's inspired by aliens. And if people know Skrillex, he's got aliens all over everything. He's got, on his record labels, everything. He's got these, especially the alien smiley faces from the icons like on your phone. He's got those all over the place. It's one of his favorite images. So they came up with 3 versions of the phone covers. One of them, of course, has the alien smiley. Others have other weird-looking alien-ish type technology and stuff like that. So pretty cool. Google working on an alien-inspired project.
Are they going to make beef jerky too, maybe?
I don't believe so, but I think Skrillex is like in the Malibu area, so he may have bought. I would imagine that if he drove to L.A., he would have seen the beef jerky shop and stopped there and highly enjoyed it, just like you or I would have. Aren't you the one who said you'd been there to the beef jerky place?
Me?
Now that I think about it?
No, that wasn't me. No.
Oh, because I remember a year ago when I was talking about this story to someone, they said they had actually stopped. I think it might be Ben Hansen. Actually stopped and has gotten beef jerky at the alien beef jerky place before.
But yeah, me.
I'm not aware of any relationship with Skrillex and the alien beef jerky, but there may be.
Yeah.
That's the news. That's all I got for the news right now. I mean, there's other UFO stories that we've got posted, some of which we talked about on your show. We've always got a lot of news, but those were some of the fun stories I wanted to talk about. So unless you have more news you want to talk about, we can wrap this section of the show up.
It's a wrap.
All right. Well, thanks again for coming on the show. Everybody remember Martin has his own show, UFO Podcast, or Podcast UFO. You yelled at me for getting it backwards last time.
Yeah.
But and people can check that out, and it's good stuff, right?
It is Wednesday nights.
Live
show.
Cool, dude. Yeah. All right, thanks.
Thank you, man. Talk to you next week.
Yep. Without further ado, let's go ahead and talk with Mr. Bill Wickersham. I am very happy to be joined by Bill Wickersham. Hello, Bill.
Hi, how are you?
I am doing good. How are you? You just got back from a great European cruise, huh?
We did, with just a week, but a bit worn out, but really enjoyed it. It was a lot of fun.
What cruise line was it, out of curiosity?
This was blocking. It was Royal Caribbean.
Oh, cool. That sounds fun. Mm-hmm. You know, I'm a big PBS fan, and they always have commercials for those European Viking river tours. Those look like they'd be a lot of fun.
You bet.
But this interview is not about cruising; it's about UFOs.
Correct.
So, want to talk about that? So, you were and or still are an adjunct professor at the University of Missouri? Is that true?
Yes, I have been at the university many years ago, and came back in around 1997 as an adjunct professor of peace studies. I'm actually an educational psychologist by training, but have tried to apply my knowledge to conflict resolution, peace studies, that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm. And you've also been a long time and are known in the area for your activism.
Well, yes, I've been, especially in the area of nuclear disarmament education. Back when I was here in the early 60s, the U.S. Air Force deployed 150 one-megaton bombs here in Mid-Missouri, as they did in North Dakota, South Dakota, Wyoming, etc. So we were actually the prime target for Soviet missiles. They had about 3 aimed at every one of ours. So had World War III started, there would have been a hole called Mid-Missouri.
Yeah, wow. Yeah, I'm from Colorado, where of course they've had have a lot of nukes in the Colorado-Wyoming border area as well.
Right.
So when was it that you got interested in UFOs?
Well, I have to tell you, first off, I am an old man. I'm 81. Excuse me just a minute. I'm an old man. I'm 81 years old, and one of my very good friends at the University of Missouri, who was finishing his PhD when I was working on my doctoral program also, was Leo Sprinkle. And I think you know Leo.
Yep, very well.
And Leo was actually my tennis partner. We played on a tennis team together. And so while I was not smitten by the UFO phenomenon, as you know, he had had some close encounters in Colorado earlier before he came here. So I first got interested, and over the years followed the work. I worked in Washington, D.C. for 15 years, and I met Elaine Douglas. You may remember Elaine. And one of my dearest friends who was introduced to me by Leo is Scott Jones. And Scott and I are still joined at the hip. He's ill right now, has had pneumonia, but as you know, he did the Rockefeller Initiative.
Mm-hmm. Right, yeah, he worked on that. Did you know him during that period of time?
I did. I met. In fact, Leo and I had attended a national psychological meeting and had dinner. My wife and I had dinner with Leo, and he says, "There's a guy you really need to know, and it's Scott Jones." And so Scott at the time was special assistant to Senator Claiborne Pell of Rhode Island. And as you may recall, he also did a 1995 convention in Washington called When Cosmic Cultures Meet. And so that was in about 82, and we've written some articles together. We've been very close since that time.
Mm-hmm. So I guess we'll start with this, since you kind of had a connection there. Some people probably should know. I mean, we've talked about it quite a bit on this show. Antonio Huneeus is on the show a lot. We've talked about it with him, and he actually wrote a document that Lawrence Rockefeller had put together on the best UFO cases. But what is your take on Lawrence Rockefeller's interest in UFOs?
Well, I think it's really a shame that, as you know, Lawrence Rockefeller and Scott Jones were able to get appointments with John Gibbons, who was Bill Clinton's top scientific advisor, and they were hoping very much to get disclosure on the part of the administration, but as these things often do, as it did with Jimmy Carter also, they simply die out for one reason or another. We don't know who's pulling the strings, you know, but I think that was a terrible shame because there was a lot of data that they presented to the Clinton administration.
Mm-hmm. So what did it finally for you? What was it that piqued your interest and finally really got you into it?
Well, I think really my talking with Scott, and then I, of course, had done a little reading before, but one of the things that really happened earlier in 1976, J. Allen Hynek, who, as you know, was the Air Force's director of Project Blue Book, came down to Southern Illinois University, where I was working at the time, and a group of us, professors and students, had a conversation with Dr. Hynek. And essentially what he told us, and this is roughly what he told us, when we studied the UFOs, there were about, essentially they had columns like swamp gas, crazy people, all the various prosaic things, and just descriptions of weather phenomena and so on, some of which was quite true. But what he told us is, in effect, we fudged the data. Just translate that, we lied about 20% of the of those sightings, and then gave them to special operations teams to then go and really check out. So those were hidden, and those were by the way, some of the data, most of the data that Danny Sheehan got later on in 1977 when he was tasked by the Carter administration with Marcia Smith to do the study of those documents.
Mm-hmm. And so that really piqued your interest finally.
Well, it did. I mean, one of my life, I was not a heavy-duty scholar, but I came into educational psychology, which normally addresses individual learning, ways to help people, to facilitate learning, to work with them based on their knowledge and skills and abilities, etc. But one of my chores with the nuclear weapons deal was also, I found that there are some really deeply held social and psychological obstacles that prevent people from dealing with difficult topics. When I used to go out originally on the nuclear weapons, if I would go to a Rotary Club and I just mentioned it, automatically the glaze went over, a collective glaze went over the eyes of the people I was talking with. And I eventually, after I read Dr. Jerome Frank's work, psychiatrist at Johns Hopkins, when I read his works, I found ways to at least ameliorate that a little bit through what I call psychological inoculation. Mm-hmm. You explain to people why they're probably not going to hear what you're going to say, but you really wish they'd stick with you for at least 20 minutes because it's a very important topic. And would you think of at least one question that you might ask me at the end of my talk? Well, some of those same social psychological obstacles, denial, habituation, helplessness, hopelessness, let the experts handle it, that sort of thing was in my repertoire. And what I found was some of the same things were operable with the UFO phenomenon, and that piqued my interest just as an educational psychologist.
That is really interesting. I have my bachelor's is in organizational psychology, and my corporate career was as a corporate trainer. So I love this sort of thing. It's tricking your learner into learning despite themselves, kind of tactics, which of course we have to do when we do UFO lectures for exactly the same reason you just mentioned. So you talked about how you inoculate your audience, you kind of preempt their skepticism maybe. What are some other things that you say to how do you explain to them, here's why you're probably not going to want to listen to what I have to say?
Well, because for some people, and as with the nukes, there's a fear element here. I mean, some people are frightened because it messes with their head based on their view of reality. I know you have seen, you may have been a part of, I Know What I Saw, the movie. I show it quite a bit. Mm-hmm. And as you'll recall in there, Governor Fife Symington states, this changed my reality. Well, something that's that heavy, that some people don't want to touch it. And of course, we all know about the giggle factor and how early on in the game, the CIA and social psychologists and others learned to debunk this and to make it silly so that the giggle factor is operable. Mm-hmm. Most people don't want to be made fun of.
Right. Yeah. That all, makes a lot of sense. It's kind of interesting. And I would just love your perspective on this as well. One interesting thing that happened to me was I did a talk for a Kiwanis once in the Colorado area. It was a packed room. These were the community leaders. And some of them listened with an open mind. A lot of them you could tell were really shut down. And there's a lot of social things going on. A lot of people taking their social cues from mentors in the room. And at the end there was this table full of retired gentlemen. And I was handing out some pieces of paper, giving them information about MUFON and some other things they could look into. And the table, none of them took the piece of paper except for one. And then one guy, older gentleman, was really grouchy about it. He didn't take a piece of paper. And I said, I decided to ask him, why is it? Why aren't you interested in this topic? And he said, I was in the Air Force, and it was my job to watch these things all the time. So I'm tired of this stuff. Right. And everybody else at the table really peaked up, and they all asked for a piece of paper then.
After he said that.
Yeah, but very quickly they changed their mind. What do you think are the mechanisms going on there that changed their mind?
In that case with you, I think he affirmed the fact that there are, in fact, some things we don't understand.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that would be my take on that. And of course, as you know, Stanton Friedman, when he talks, he always says, "Here are the data. Is there anyone in the audience who, with data, can counter what I've been saying?"
Mm-hmm.
And you know, usually it has to be done gently, not as one-upmanship or
right.
I'm the big expert or anything. And that, by the way, is part. It's awfully easy to get upset. As you can imagine, in a town like Columbia, Missouri, and given my background, there's some people who hate my guts, some others who, in fact, I just had a piece on another topic in a local newspaper, and in the comments online, one says that I'm a certified wacko. I've been called an embarrassment to the university and this sort of thing. Now, I have a lot of other friends and people that I consider highly educated who are just the opposite. But you have, if you're going to get in this game, you got to be prepared to do that without overreacting. It's
right.
not good to get in an argument over UFOs. You know, there may come a time you have to simply agree to disagree.
Right. And that right there, I think that statement you just made represents a lot of the difficulty that people have with this field. Is one, first of all, who do you believe? Second of all, you know, dealing with people at odds with each other and kind of being a bit unprofessional when they do disagree.
That's right. And when people use absurd arguments, you can counter them, but you don't use overkill. How you say something and what is as important as what you say,
mm-hmm.
and what your facial expressions are like, and how you really respond.
Mm-hmm.
If you do it, you can be as right as right can be, and present it in the wrong way, and you're not going to make much headway.
Mm-hmm. And the who is really important. I mean, that experience that I talked about also showed me that sometimes what you're saying isn't as important as who it's coming from, and that being an example. And that's why I really like to write about, and some people in the UFO field aren't appreciative of, they don't care what the Kardashians have to say or what some other star or musician or actor or actress has to say. But I like covering those stories because those are the people take social cues from, and they're going to hear what they have to say no matter what it is, whereas they might not hear even what a university professor has to say.
Well, see, one of the issues that debunkers, and even highly educated debunkers, make the point, and I agree in part with it, just because Edgar Mitchell or the astronauts or famous John Mack or whoever else says something doesn't mean they're necessarily right. However, in all the research courses I've been in, graduate research courses, it's like a cold case with the police. You may not have an ET in hand, or you may not have, for your purposes, the crashed UFO or whatever. But if we have highly credentialed people who say, in Mitchell's case, that the extraterrestrial hypothesis is 100% level of confidence, we start with those experts, and what you and I want, and what Steve Bassett and others want, Stephen Greer, is to have congressional hearings, and let's put the folks, the nays and the yays, on the same platform and see where that spins out. But you just to dismiss something, I won't mention his name because I don't want to embarrass him, but I know a man at Yale who will say, well, just because somebody important says it's true doesn't make it true. I mean, nobody in this world probably has challenged authority any more than I have, especially in international affairs. But it pays to listen with people you agree with and disagree with, and let's start the research there.
Mm-hmm. Seeing as how, like you said, you've had kind of a lifetime of challenging authority, it seems like there has been a shift, and I think that this has played well for people taking UFOs seriously, in that especially I don't know, and I'm not to get political or to one side or another, but it does seem to be mostly during the Bush years, maybe partially due to the military scandals, especially around funding that came out. People are more skeptical of the government than ever, it seems, right now. And you probably have experienced where it wasn't like that, probably when you started your activism.
No, in fact, in 1962, I guess we started our protests against the nukes in 1962. But our first actual public demonstration here in Columbia, we were a little late in the game regarding Vietnam, was 1965. And I'd been a military person myself. I'd served regular Army and some reserve time. And on that very first picket line, we actually did a picket line where you walked, and later on people just stood still. But we had Marine reservists here shaking their fists at us, calling us communists. In fact, I had a director of a state historical society call me, and I'll say a GD communist, as if you took exception. And believe it or not, I was using information from my old Army colonel who had warned us against Vietnam and had said something to the effect that something like, he didn't mention Gulf of Tonkin, but something like that. They were looking for an excuse. We presented that to our congressman, and he just laughed at us. And as you know, the Vietnam War started with only 2 U.S. senators dissenting, and the rest of the House and everybody else bought the thing, Johnson's fraud, the hook, line, and sinker. But it was difficult. And it is somewhat less difficult now, but I would say considerably so. And by the way, on politics, I have spoken both to the local Democratic support group. It's a group called Mule Skinners here, and to the Republican group about 3 weeks ago. They're called Pachyderms, and got very good reception, as I did with the Boone County Medical Society. We had 40 doctors in that room and only one debunker out of the whole bunch, and a couple citing their own UFO sightings. So I do think there's a trend. I think a lot of people don't know what to believe, but they're less vehement. They don't go after you like they did on the anti-war stuff early on. So I think you're right. But having said that, here I'm a person who supported the domestic policy of Barack Obama, and what do I find out? Here's a man who got the Nobel Peace Prize for a speech essentially in the Czech Republic saying he was going to diminish or cut back on nukes. They've now approved a new 30-year plan, $1.3 trillion for new nukes and delivery systems. That puts a little guy like me who's been working on this, you say, my God, how much progress have we made? And in that area, I'm afraid not much.
Right, yeah. Scary stuff. So it brings up a lot of stuff. I guess I'll get to, there's several things I want to touch on still. But I guess now that we've talked about nukes, and I'm sure it's on everybody's mind who's listening, is the work of people like Robert Salas or Robert Hastings especially about this connection with UFOs and nukes.
That's right. In fact, I use Robert's, he has a DVD. If you just Google www.ufohastings.org, you have the full 7 officers that in fact, he does a DVD, and then he has Robert Salas and I think Colonel Halt's on there, and a total of five individuals, in which they're showing essentially that somebody in UFOs is deeply concerned about nuclear weapons, and it can close down a flight at a Minuteman Mountain Air Force Base. I've talked with Robert Salas. We never met, but we talk on the phone, and he knows what he's talking about. And of course, he was required to sign a non-disclosure statement under what's called JNAP 146, the Joint Army Navy Air Force Publication 146, which, when coupled with Air Force Regulation 200-2, says in effect, if you disclose what you know about UFOs, there will be a $10,000 fine, possibly 10 years in jail, loss of all benefits, And we know clearly, Stephen Greer's documented this, and others have, I have for that matter, that there have been threats to family. And we know where your sister lives, we know where your mother lives, that sort of thing. I mean, that started back in certainly very early on, and certainly after the Robertson panel in '52.
Mm-hmm. So,
and there's another organization, and I wish I had it on my tongue right now, but we know there have been at least 300 documented incursions at either nuclear weapons plants or missile sites or other facilities that deal with nuclear weapons. And of course, New Mexico was where the Enola Gay was based. That was one of, some people believe, one of the first reasons for the UFO concern in New Mexico, the nuke connection.
Mm-hmm. What is your take on that, then? Do you think whoever's flying these things around has similar concerns as you do?
Well, I don't. There's no way to know exactly. I mean, that's what we do. That's why we need a lot more research. I know that I think Robert believes that definitely the folks who are doing this, closing down and a flight of missiles, are trying to tell us something.
Mm-hmm.
It's madness, clearly. There's nothing you can do with those missiles except omnicide anyway. Even if Pakistan and India just use their 50 missiles each, it will take us toward a year of nuclear winter in which the crops won't grow and some people will starve.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, really scary stuff. And it does make me think, I mean, it is shocking to me, and I'm sure you think about this more than I do, that we've had this weapon for 65 years, and humans being what they are, it's surprising that they haven't been used more often.
Well, I'll do a little pitch, if it's okay now, on our online book. Is that okay?
Go for it.
Yeah, Jared Gasson, a graduate student in journalism here at the University of Missouri, and I did a book called Confronting Nuclear War, the Role of Education, Religion, and the Community. And I'll give you the address for that. It's www.confrontingnuclearwar.com. And in that, we spell out some of the near misses. We've come so close on several occasions, people just don't know. On one occasion, a lieutenant colonel in the Soviet Union saved us all. He was heading up a 200-man unit for an early warning system, and their computer screwed up and the screens lit up to the effect that there was an all-out attack by the U.S. He in his heart knew this was not right, and he failed to notify the higher level. That is way too close. On another occasion, a joint U.S. and American rocket launched from a submarine gave the appearance of, I think it was launched from a submarine, gave the appearance of an offensive weapon. Putin had, not Putin, who was the man before him? A man with an alcohol problem.
Starts with an M. Oh, Yeltsin.
Yeltsin, President Yeltsin had the black box on his lap, and decided not to order the return launch. We know that for a long time the Soviet and the later Russian computers and their overall incoming system only 50% of the time. So here we sit with weapons on hair trigger and really the destruction of the world at hand, and we go ahead and produce more.
Mm-hmm. So the question is, I get curious about, I mean, pure speculation, of course, and it's out there, but just one of the things I think about is, are these guys, if there is a third party coming here, how have they ever disarmed to avoid, help avoid a war, a nuclear war, Or are they maybe here just to watch one go down?
Well, I think they gave us an example of what they can do with Robert Salas's missiles in, I believe it was what year was it? In the 1960s.
Right.
He was one of two launch officers in a launch control center, and the UFO comes right over his launch control center and shuts down 10 Minuteman missiles, and Boeing had to come out the next week to put them back online. So I don't know about the ethics of folks, of off-planet folks. I don't know how that works. But, one case that some people make, it's like we may be a science project for them, like we look at indigenous people or a colony of ants. It could be that. If these folks are a million years ahead of us, as they could be, or even more than that, in technology, they could probably do anything they want to. Mm-hmm. But then that leads us, I know, I mentioned to you in the past the Whiteman Air Force Base incident here in Missouri.
Right.
Did you want to talk about that a little bit?
That's exactly what I was going to go to next.
Well, as you know, Linda Moulton Howe, who is an excellent ufologist, TV anchor, writer, writes books and articles, she did an interview with a young airman first class who was stationed at Whiteman Air Force Base at Knob Noster, Missouri. Dale Hogan, this was 1984, and one night about 2 a.m. in the morning, he and his sergeant were on the tarmac at Whiteman Air Force Base. There weren't many airplanes there then because it was actually a nuclear weapons missile site. But they had what were called igloos, and igloos held spare nuclear warheads. So they had warheads on the missiles ready to go, but they also had spare ones. They had about 20 of these igloos were on the base. And so Hogan was on top of these, one of these fixing it or whatever, and a very large disc UFO, probably not even 1,000 feet in the air, goes right over the igloo and shines down what looked like a laser beam or something like that, a beam of light at any rate, which looked like it was doing a search back and forth of what was in those igloos, and especially the one that Hogan was sitting on. And that also sent down another light which burned his arm, a little bit of purple light, I believe. So naturally, he and his sergeant don't know what in the world is going on, and so the UFO just hovered, and over time it was almost a 2-hour experience. But at any rate, they called headquarters, and out come two very large trucks going as fast as they could go, breaking all protocols, not stopping as they're supposed to at the various gates, and come right there on the tarmac where the igloos were. And out steps an officer, and Dale couldn't tell whether he was a light colonel or a major because he couldn't tell the color of his oak leaf, but it was one or the other. And Dale asked him, "Should I fire?" And essentially he said, "For God's sake, no. In effect, I'll have you for lunch." And he says, "Put your weapon down, point it down, and don't look up. Don't look up at all." And so then what happens is Harrier jets, and by the way, this guy was the UFO officer. Now, what's with that? The Air Force said in 1969, we don't deal with UFOs anymore. Mm-hmm. But here you have a major or a light colonel who is the post UFO officer, and they have cameras that start to try to take a picture. Big one, mounted on a truck, big oval camera trying to take a picture. And then the Harrier jets, there were some Harrier jets were ordered out, and the UFO would take off and go maybe 20 miles just like that, and the Harrier jets would try to chase it. The UFO would come back and start doing its monitoring of the igloos, and this went on for quite a while. And finally, the UFO went away. Well, the next morning, Airman Hogan was called in for a debriefing, was told to sign a non-disclosure agreement, and you can hear him in his interview with Linda Moulton Howe saying, and they warned me that we know where your family lives, or words to that effect. So they threatened him with JNAP 146, the non-disclosure agreement, and his family. Now that happened in 1984 right here in Missouri.
Mm-hmm. Were you able to ever speak with that witness?
I've never been able to find Dale Hogan. No, I haven't. But somewhere on there, I've forgotten exactly what I Googled to get Linda Moulton Howe's interview. It was on various spots online, and then some of them were removed, but I think it's still available. Mm-hmm. I'll try to Google it when I get off here.
Yeah, no problem. So, because I have noticed that when you Google you and Whiteman, that you've done interviews with others, but regarding nuclear cases. Yeah,
if for someone who wants to hear essentially what I just said, my friend Mike McMillan did a DVD on this, and you can just Google Bill Wickersham. It's Wickersham. Bill Wickersham, Whiteman Air Force Base UFO.
Mm-hmm. So now you've been out and you've been doing, like you said, these talks for years now, right? On UFOs.
I don't get a lot of gigs, but I have had several, yes, and I've had some in neighboring universities and in one graduate education course, and also in a folklore course. Mm-hmm. But I cannot get my friends in the journalism school excited about it. You know, we have one of the best journalism schools in the world, and I have not been successful in getting anybody to do some real in-depth investigative research on this. Because we've had sightings right here in Columbia. We had one landing actually in 1973, and we had a triangle over one of our golf courses, over a house by people who live near the golf course. And, of course, the famous Cape Girardeau sighting in 1941, which was even before Roswell. And I have had a conversation with the woman, I'm trying to think, Charlotte Mann, who now lives in Tyler, Texas. I called her about a month ago when I had a piece in our local paper on the Cape Girardeau sighting.
Mm-hmm. Maybe you could explain.
It was a crash.
Who she is and a little bit about the Cape Girardeau.
Well, Charlotte Mann is the granddaughter of a local Baptist minister in 1941 in Cape Girardeau, Missouri. And I'm blocking on his name at the moment. I'll think of it in a moment. But he was called out. He was called at home in, I think it was roughly April of 1941, to say a blessing over 3 entities who had crashed in a UFO about 15 miles outside Cape Girardeau, Missouri. And when he got there, now this is according to Charlotte, when he got there, he did say the blessing, and he could actually see the entities. And one had fallen outside the craft, the other 2 were inside. But then he was immediately called over by the military, and in those days, Sikeston, Missouri had one of our Top Gun Air Force pilot training programs. But the people apparently from that base, and I believe they were from Sikeston, called him over and told him this never happened, you didn't see it, et cetera, et cetera. So over the years, he didn't talk much about it, but his wife knew about it, and Charlotte picked up little bits of information at the dinner table and so on. But in the year that her mother was dying, her mother told her the whole story. When I wrote my piece for the Columbia Daily Tribune, I wanted to be sure I had it right, so I called her and all of the major points, and she said, yes, that is absolutely true. Mm-hmm. All the points that I had in the article.
Wow.
So, as you know, maybe you know, Ryan Wood, also in his book, he's written a book where he's documented some, I think, 79 or so crashes, and this is one of the ones that he too has researched. And just like Roswell, it needs a lot more research. I've talked to a couple of people from the area. One man told me it's total myth. Another journalist told me that her junior high social studies teacher or science teacher had explained it to them. So there's a lot of unknowns and could be total nonsense, but my hunch is it's true.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, really interesting case. But getting back to the journalism department, I think that it is sad because they're really doing a disservice. And maybe you could point out that actually mainstream media has really it's a popular topic for them, and outlets such as the Chicago Tribune when it came to a sighting over the Chicago O'Hare Airport, or even more recently, Fox and Friends, Clayton Morris, the host, interviewed someone about UFOs and was very positive about it. And it turns out, I didn't even know this. I mean, this guy is a host on Fox and Friends. He did a UFO show. He's really into UFOs. But there's numerous other examples, people on the Today Show who have expressed their interest, even Al Roker
Larry
and
King,
Matt Lauer, sure. Larry King. So there's a lot of interest out there by credible and regarded journalists, and they're doing a disservice because I think it's a good way to show them how to be unbiased and look at both sides of the story. You could even show them.
To the best of my knowledge, NBC, ABC, the Lehrer NewsHour did one little program at one time. But essentially, Terry Hansen's book, I'm sure, the book Missing Times, in which he documents the early debunking strategy of the news media way back, starting in 1952 with the Robertson panel. And what often happens, I've been treated very well by local newspapers and radio. We have 3 radio stations, have done several interviews. Almost one is almost a regular, monthly arrangement. And we have both of our university newspaper has run my stuff, but we can't seem to get investigative reporters to really go after it. I mean, that was Terry's point. Just like, Stanton Friedman and others weren't journalists, but eventually some people got excited about Roswell. We need that same kind of thing. And the anthropologists, for God's sake, I wish they would get into this also. Mm-hmm. Back in the day, what's interesting and what always throws you for a loop is we had a professor of physics, department chair at Southeast Missouri State University, who was in college, at Cape Girardeau, where this crash that I told you about supposedly occurred. And a man by the name of Harley Rutledge actually had students going out making contacts with UFOs at night. He was he was one of the first in Missouri to do this. But apparently he never wrote anything about the Cape Girardeau deal. So, you say to yourself, gosh, how did that happen? Well, things like this do happen, but apparently, according to Terry Hansen, what happens is that local newspapers like Malmstrom Air Force Base in that area in Montana, they report, but when it goes up the chain, it never makes a big splash. I mean, just think back. Recently, here we have John Podesta, who was Bill Clinton's chief of staff. He was Obama's transition man and is likely to play a very big role of some sort, maybe even manager of Hillary's campaign, has gone on record several times saying that we ought to disclose. And when he left the Obama administration, he did a tweet to Maureen Dowd of the New York Times talking about his 10 biggest disappointments in the last few years politically. And number one on the list was his inability to get the the Clinton administration or either administration to really disclose about UFOs, or words to that effect. In other words, it hadn't come out. Now, can you imagine him saying something, any other topic, and that not being on the nightly news? We didn't see it at all. Mm-hmm. The New York Times had a little bitty article, the Washington Post did, and some other newspapers, of course. But that's pretty darn big news, and it was not out there.
Well, the hard part, though, especially with that, is that Podesta didn't speak further on that. He wouldn't answer questions or elaborate.
But still, to have made that statement, and you would have thought that, I'd like to have seen a 60-second or 30-second comment on CBS News or 60 Minutes or somebody.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so, there's still challenges ahead. Speaking of media, it looks like you're a regular on your public radio show called The Paul Pepper Show.
Yes, Paul, that's with KBIA. I'm pretty regular. We do it about once every month or 6 weeks. I have one coming up in a few days with Paul, and he's been very good about this, and of course the beauty of it is the podcast goes online, which is also the case of just local newspaper items. If anybody's interested, they can just Google Bill Wickersham UFOs, and you'll see quite a lengthy list. And with Paul Pepper, if you Google Paul Pepper, it's Pepper, Bill Wickersham, you get all of my podcasts.
Mm-hmm. So I guess a question would be, among academia, what is your sense of how people feel about it? Are, for instance, your colleagues, other professors, interested in the topic less so than the normal person? Well,
the point is, I can, I'm in peace studies, and for me, this is one of the biggest peace issues in the history of humankind, just as we've talked about the nukes and other issues. And as you know, this issue, if what we're saying is correct, if we ever do have open contact, it challenges everything we do in academia. I had a guy the other day, a physicist, challenge me in a public meeting with the old argument, well, you can't get from here to there. That's not the question. The question is, how did they get from there to here? Mm-hmm. And is there some physics we don't understand? And I've always given this thermodynamics lecture, that it would take forever to get there, and you never get back, and all that sort of thing. If somebody's a million years ahead of you, it might be a little bit humbling. As you know, the Brookings Institution in 1961 was asked by NASA to do some work on essentially the issue of outer space, et cetera. And what they concluded was that the people who will be the most put off by the actual on-hand discovery of extraterrestrials will be the physical scientists and engineers. Mm-hmm. They're locked into a mode. And what happens, when I get that argument, you of course are familiar with the Skunk Works and Ben Rich and Don Phillips. Mm-hmm. And here we have Ben Rich, especially Don Phillips. He's right online. All you have to do is Google alien technology, Don Phillips, and he's telling us that everything from 1945 on, with the exclusive top-secret work that was done at the Lockheed Skunk Works in California, which is our top aeronautical, at least that we know of, top-secret research, that they in fact used the artifacts and the information gleaned from Roswell for future developments of the Blackbird airplane, even drones and stuff that we use today, the stuff that Colonel Corso talked about. When I put that in quotation marks, or I tell people, go look at Don Phillips. This guy had top secret clearances. He had been a high-ranking Air Force officer, one of the top engineers in the world, aeronautical, and they just won't respond. They say it can't be. Mm-hmm. So, if you say something, it can't be, therefore it isn't, well, you're never going to get anywhere.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a terrible argument.
And I do have a few colleagues who are interested, but many of my other colleagues don't see this as a peace issue. I mean, the whole issue of national sovereignty. Who's going to speak for humanity? As you know, Lee Spiegel tried to get at this at the UN in 1976, I think, and no, we don't have a lot of people addressing that issue. Who's going to speak for humankind when this occurs? And by the way, you know, are you familiar with the astrobiology meetings that have been going on at the Library of Congress?
Yep, we've been writing about those. I've been following those.
That's right, you have. I think I saw it. So, and as you may know, Victor Vigiani and I put together a letter which was signed by an open letter signed by Edgar Mitchell, the astronaut, and Mr. Paul Hellyer, the Honorable Paul Hellyer, former Defense Minister and Deputy Prime Minister of Canada, in which we wrote back to NASA and the Library of Congress saying you had a 2-day meeting in which you were asking the basic questions about what will be the upshot of the discovery of even low life or extend that to intelligent life. What will be the effect on religion, on the society? And they've had several historians and some physicists, and they have a meeting. In fact, it may have just occurred. I'm not sure. They have a second one. But our letter was, for God's sake, if you're going to do this and you don't even have one UFO program on there, it's a little bit like taking your kids to Disneyland and showing them a parking lot, you know, without opening up to the real deal. But we got no response on that. But fortunately, the letter did go, you know, online. But that I think that is really too bad that the NASA and Library of Congress won't have at least one panel on the UFO phenomenon.
And I guess finally, because we're running out of time, you know, Stanton Friedman talks a lot about, well, they might not be, you know, really wanting to engage us because we seem to be, our biggest pastime is tribal warfare. And
right.
You working in peace studies, I mean, do you see a change? Of course, in the United States, we have it easy because we haven't had, you know, any war going on in our land. I guess you could consider maybe 9/11, but really nothing prior to that, maybe the Mexican-American Wars or something long time ago. But the rest of the world, there's a lot of fighting going on everywhere. As far as the world view, international situation is, do you see that we've gotten, as a species, more peaceful recently?
There is one author or two or three who made the case that yes, overall there are a few killings in warfare, but I have to remind you that John Stockwell, a very high-ranking CIA operative, has written a book called The Secrets. Has written two major pieces called The CIA's Secret Wars, and he testified before the Church Commission in 1976. His estimate, if you included Cambodia, all of Southeast Asia, and the secret wars that the CIA conducted in Latin America and Africa, that essentially the United States was involved between 1945 and 76 in the killing of at least 6 million people. And keep in mind that we still have these nukes on hair trigger. We're willing to kill millions of people. In fact, whenever any politician says all options are on the table, what we're doing is threatening the world. If I were an ET out there, I would look, and I've seen cartoons saying, what in the world's with them? They killed their own people. I mean, the tribalism that exists on the planet, they may just be looking at us and saying, well, what are those fools doing? You know?
Yeah, I mean, especially in the last 50 years, it doesn't seem like there has been much improvement. I mean, if you were the consultant, you were for an extraterrestrial race, and they were like, hey, Bill, you know, on Earth, has the situation gotten any better, you know, for us to maybe approach them? What would your advice be?
You mean if ETs were asking me about the nature of warfare and conflict? I would tell them, we're in pretty sad condition.
Yeah.
You know, it's Well, like I said, 1.3 trillion for new nukes, a military budget of $600 million, a billion with a B, a year. One of my jobs when I was in Washington, I worked for former Senator Joseph Clark of Pennsylvania. He had a coalition on national priorities and military policy. And what we found out, and what is true today, what drives all the nuke stuff, it's not just human conflict, it's greed. TRW, Boeing, General Electric, all these companies make billions of dollars. We have a brand new nukes plant in Kansas City. I mean, who in the world needs new nuclear weapons? Mm-hmm. But the money is in it. And when I lobbied, I had dollar bills in my pocket. Those people, those companies, figuratively had $1,000 bills. Mm-hmm. And you know who's going to win that race?
Yeah, unfortunately. And more as time goes on, it seems the money speaks louder and louder, which kind of indicates we haven't learned a lot of lessons over the years.
Well, I'm not going to give up, and I know you're not either, and we have to sow the seeds of peace, and I don't think we'll see anything resembling that. I'm 81, certainly not in my lifetime, but we still have to give it a shot. And I would like to think I also worked for Norman Cousins for about 5 years, the editor of the Saturday Review. In fact, Norman was the intermediary between Kennedy, Khrushchev, and the Pope. And his statement was, Bill, my mind, my soul, my body is one cell in the stream of humankind. And I'm going to do the best I can do, and I hope you will too. So I think we have to give it a shot anyway.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that's a good note to end on. Thank you so much for coming on the show. This has been great. The time has flown by. Where would you point people to see your work, or did you have a website? I know you mentioned one earlier that you would like to point people to.
If they just Google my name and UFOs, they'll get more than they want.
Right. They'll get videos and articles, so that's great. All right. Thanks so much for coming on the show.
All right. Thank you, sir. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much to Bill Wickersham for joining us today for the show. Really interesting guy. Hats off to him for being brave enough to get out there. First of all, for the nuclear activism. I don't think there are many people that would disagree, unfortunately, the people in charge, but that, nuclear proliferation is not a good thing, and less nukes is better. But hats off for him for doing that work, and also being brave enough to get the UFO issue out there. Certainly people listen, and there's an amount of credibility that comes along with being a university professor. And I notice, when he writes a story, it does get a lot of attention. And so we're really happy that he's out there doing the work that he does. Thank you, Bill, for being on the show and for doing what you do. So it's great to get the opportunity to talk to him again. I also want to thank, some of the contributors for the show. So thank you to the Clerk Chronicles, or for Caleb Hanks, who does the intro and the close music. He goes by the Clerk Chronicles. It's kind of the name of the album or the EP that we got that music from. You can go to his site, The Clerk, to see some of his artwork. He's also a great artist, and he does all of this animation and stuff like that. He does this comic book around the music, very futuristic and cool stuff. But you could see that on our radio page. Some of the other stuff you'll see on the radio page is a link to PSN Radio. They used to replay our shows. I'm not sure if they are still, but if they are, thank you. If they're not, well, thanks for doing it in the past. Someone else who's replaying our music is Dark Matters Radio, which actually is part of the Art Bell Network. And Art Bell's going to be coming back on the air and doing another show, so everybody's really excited about that. We're excited about that, and we'll have more news about that coming up. But thank you so much for Dark Matters for replaying our shows as well. It's so much fun to have such a big network of colleagues out there and being able to cooperate. And we certainly love to do so, because all of these contributors are doing a lot of wonderful stuff, including Martin Willis, of course, who is now joining us for the news portion of the show. Be sure to check out his podcast, UFO, as well. All part of our podcasting and online UFO radio family. So thank you guys so much. And of course, thank you to the listeners. Thank you to those of you I met at the Joshua Tree Retreat Center for Contact in the Desert this past weekend. I got to meet quite a few new listeners that I hadn't met before. And that was a lot of fun. It's always a ton of fun when you guys are able to make my lectures where I can share some more information, because my lectures are actually usually full of stuff that I don't get to share on the radio show because they're either not related. So, for instance, I talked about these strange alien contacts. I've done that talk now a couple times, and I'm going to do it in Roswell. So if you want to see this talk, I mean, you know how I'm skeptical, but these cases are amazing. They're just weird cases of alien contact that seem legitimate, have been taken legitimate in the various countries where they've happened, and they're just weird, really weird, and they seem credible. I don't know what to make of them. Really crazy stuff. So, but if you want to see that talk, you could see it at Roswell, at the festival. They always have their July 4th Roswell party. So I'll be out there doing some lectures, and I'll be doing this strange alien cases out there. So check us out there. We're also getting ramped up for the UFO Congress, so you can already go register at ufocongress.com. The dates are up there. Go register and especially get your hotel rooms ASAP. You know how I tell you guys to get your rooms if you want to be in the conference center. And the hotel is absolutely gorgeous. Those of you who have been there, I've never had one person come to me and say, "Oh, you said these hotel rooms are beautiful and this place is great, and it's not as nice as you said." In fact, I have people come up to me and say, "Oh my gosh, you were right. This place is magical. It's so beautiful." Everybody agrees with me. It's one thing that everybody agrees with me on, and certainly that's not everything. Even, Martin was giving me a hard time about some stuff earlier, and I'll have to get him for that. But anyway, be sure to get your rooms because we sell out of the host hotel earlier and earlier every year. We've got some great people that we're going to have lined up for this next conference, so you're going to want to be there. So go to ufocongress.com for that. And then, of course, thank you all for listening. I mean, we put a lot of blood, sweat, and tears into producing this daily news at openminds.tv. All of those stories that Martin and I talked about, you can find there at openminds.tv. We're going to have a new UFO show, UFO report.